Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be finally talking about the newest album from Alcest, called Kodama. So if you've been following my spiraling journey through black metal, one thing you've probably noticed is that I tend towards the more melodic and atmospheric brand of it. Honestly, probably what I would recommend for most listeners trying to get into the genre. At the end of the day, I'm a real sucker for a good melody and a great tune, and the black metal that I tend to like tends to fall in that vein. And thus, it was only a matter of time before I had to talk about Alcest, the French experimental black metal project that many consider one of the pioneering bands of the black gaze scene, blending in black metal textures with shoegaze. And I'll admit, while I'm not really much of a huge shoegaze fan, early on I liked a lot of what I heard from Alcest, even though in comparison with so many of their peers they weren't exactly writing incredibly dark or bleak songs. There was a knack for melodic composition that I just found stunning, especially on their debut album Souvenirs de Notre Monde. Hell, I actually liked it more than their follow-up Eclosion de Lune, the one that tends to get more critical acclaim. But it has always seemed like Alcest was much more drawn to the more ethereal, soaring tones that came with post-rock or shoegaze. And with each successive album, the black metal tones receded more and more before their 2014 album Shelter just discarded them altogether. In other words, there was a significant part of me that wasn't really interested in hearing more from Alcest. I saw what happened when Opeth left black and death metal for old school prog rock, and that was at least a genre I knew, understood a little bit more, and actually liked. And yet when I heard that Alcest's Kodama was actually pivoting back towards black metal, reportedly inspired by the Hayao Miyazaki film Princess Mononoke, I was actually kind of intrigued. For as much as their shift in sound could kind of frustrate me, they did write some interesting material and good melodies, so I wanted to check this out. And thanks to all you voting on Patreon, I now can. So, what did we get from Kodama? Well, this is a bit of a tricky album to evaluate. On the one hand, if you're looking for Alcest to return to more of their black metal roots, well, for the most part, you get there. This is certainly a return to a heavier sound. And yet, in that peculiar way that so much black metal is for me, this is probably one of the breeziest, mistiest, and most refined and relaxing black gaze albums that you're going to hear this year. And not just because most of the scream vocals are kept to just a few songs. Now, I'm used to that coming from Alcest. I wasn't expecting an album as driven or as sweeping as that last Seor album, Guardians, for instance, but it does mean I'm not quite as captivated by this album as I want to be. It's certainly solid and it's certainly enjoyable, but for a record seeking to capture the spirit of a movie that so many people would consider a classic in anime, I'm not quite certain it hits that sort of scale and power, at least for me. And you know, it's tough to articulate why that is. Outside of the closing track Onyx, which simmers in a dark, murkier guitar tone with no drums and the mournful melody fluttering in behind the bleakness, much of this album plays in a black gaze sound that isn't unfamiliar coming from Alcest. From the opening title track, it's certainly a return to a rougher tone against a cloud of cymbals, with the tremolo picking, the sparse kick drums, and the rattling riffs balanced against a very solidly firm bass line. In fact, it's very telling how much that bass line drives the minor melodic shifts within the song, especially with Neja's smoother vocals coasting above it with hints of backing tones from Catherine Shepard. Although I'd be remiss not to highlight the two interweaving guitars on the interlude midway through, it builds some impressive atmosphere, especially when the choppier strumming picks up off the gently muffled beat there. It's a gorgeous highlight, and while I'm a little bit cooler on the major chord guitar melody holding the mid-tempo of Eclosion, it's still memorable in its own right. But it's also at this point when you realize that for as good of a lot of that melody is, Alcest is really content to leave the main melodies of these songs midway to the back of the mix and never really drive them. In fact, it's an open question how much of these songs have any sort of driving momentum at all. The tempos, especially in a lot of the drum work, seems to be comfortably middle of the road. You're not getting a lot of blast beats, with the kick drums and especially the snares never quite having the same crack or punch to push more of a groove forward. Now, of course, there are exceptions, especially with that sharper smolder on Oiseaux de Proie, which is probably the most openly aggressive song here and easily one of the best. But it also means for as much as I might like some of the atmosphere that's cultivated on the liquid guitar interludes of Eclosion against the kick drums, or the solid main melody on touch that flows off the gentle patter of drums and a smoldering bass, or the sharper and more aggressive drum work on Je Suis Alcest that drives a crescendo that I really wish exploded a bit better beyond the fluttering tones and hit a more satisfying ending. It seems like a lot of these songs don't really have that big climax point for me. As much as this album flies within the clouds, it never quite blows through them to hit those new transcendent heights. Now granted, as little as they're a factor on any sort of Alcest album, the lyrics are not exactly a lot of help. For a little bit of context, Kodama loosely translates to tree spirit, and while Princess Mononoke is an environmental fable, it's a morally complex one you don't often see. I don't want to spoil much of the movie, although the movie's nearly 20 years old. It came out in 1997, and if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. But there are shades of gray here between the tranquility of the forest balanced against the untamed savagery and frontier humanity struggling to survive, but often negligent and rapacious in its own greed. In that respect, Alcest's Kodama seems to be speaking from the tree spirit's point of view across this album, not quite understanding the physical dangers against the forest around it, but lashing out in raw pain to protect whatever it can of its sanctuary, with a primal intensity that humanity cannot truly comprehend in plain-spoken language. Now, it's a little bit ironic that said message is now being conveyed by humans, which makes the environmentalist message all the more stark, but kind of fitting, as it isn't like nature is unleashing hordes of wild spirit to defend itself in today's day and age when nature kind of needs defending. But at the same time, Kodama is inherently one-sided, which doesn't really capture that moral ambiguity and complexity that allowed Princess Mononoke to hold up as such a powerful animated environmental fable, while something like, say, Fern Gully is often viciously mocked. For good reason. And well, to Alcest's credit, the writing is abstract enough that you can mostly ignore it, but for such an important thematic element of the original film to be left out does seem a little bit glaring for me. I really wish some of the moral complexity did come through here. But beyond that though, this is a pretty easy and enjoyable black metal record to like. Another album that I could add to my list of extremely good but not really quite great black metal that's pretty damn relaxing for me. I listened to this on the beach. Definitely a step up from Shelter in my books. While I don't think it hits those transcendent moments that say Sayor's decidedly less refined Guardians hit for me, it's still damn solid all the same. Then a very strong 7 out of 10 and a recommendation from me. If you're looking for a good atmospheric black metal album with some pretty interesting themes that goes down pretty easy, well, you probably already heard this already. I'm a little late to the punch here, but if not, definitely give Alcest's Kodama a listen. It's worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here. Yes, I know I'm late to it, but I am curious what your opinions on this, that they actually went back towards black metal instead of staying with post-rock. I can't think that's entirely divisive considering they made a lot of black metal before, but hey, you never know in this case. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears for that. And also, if you guys want to get more involved in the album recommendation and selection process, I got my Patreon right here, where you guys 3 times a week can vote on my schedule, and once a week directly add albums to that schedule at certain Patreon levels. More details are here. I'd be happy to get you guys on board, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.